which is kind of, or the test, which is a little bit of, it's all obviously covered in the instructions that I provided you guys. So, and then I'll go through basically what I've done is I've pulled out some material that I wanted to mention to you guys to say, hey, if when you're studying, pay particular attention to these things here. So as I mentioned, the exam's 35 multiple choice questions. It's how many did I say? 6 short answer essay questions. Yeah, 6, each worth 5 points each. Or was it 7? No. Do you remember what I said? Because I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's written down somewhere. 7 points, I want to say. I feel like that number sounds right.
Yeah, 5 at 7 points each. That would be it, because that would be 35 points there. Or, yeah, because no, 35 times 70, so it'd be 30. There's 5 of them, and they're worth 6 points each. That's what it is. Okay, good. Glad we got that out of the way. So my big thing with the test is that I designed, and I want you guys to do well. Like I don't, I have no reason for you guys not to. The interesting thing I'll tell you in doing this over the years is that the grades aren't a normal distribution. You have a lot of people that do really well, and then a lot of people that don't do so well. And it generally comes down to whether or not they use the review material. And that's the biggest predictor there. So there's actually, it's not a bell curve. It's actually 2 curves that sort of, there's not a lot of low Bs, strangely enough. I think the average grade on this usually ends up being an 87. So a lot of people do really well. Statistically speaking, I think if you guys are here and you're engaged in the review process, then you're probably going to do well, just the nature of who you guys are. So yay, congratulations. That's big picture on the exam. On the short answer questions, I've generally given 3 to 5 sentences, a paragraph in length as a guidance there. The big important thing to remember though is that if there's a question that has 2 parts or 3 parts, I don't remember if there are any 3-part, maybe there are some 3-part questions. Just make sure you directly answer each part. Because you can give a really good answer to, 1 part of a 2-part question, and then you would only get half points for it. So that wouldn't be ideal. Any questions about exam format? Anything? Okay. I will go ahead and I'm going to go through this. Like I said, I just have a list here. So I will go through some concepts and stop and ask any questions you have along the way. I'm happy to answer them. This is very, very chill. So the beginning of the class. Oh, and the other thing is this isn't in any particular order. So it's not necessarily going to follow. But I'll try as best I can to sort of point you to where to go. Early in the class, we discussed social contract theory. That was, we were talking about the social contract theorists when we were also talking about the state of nature. So just remember that state of nature was this hypothetical situation where there's no government at all and people are free to do whatever they want. And so that led to these questions of, what is the nature of a man or people, human, man, woman, whoever, are we inherently evil and selfish, or do we generally want to get along and that sort of thing? So social contract theory came about as a result of that. And basically it's the idea that, when we enter into a society, we give up certain freedoms for the protection of the state, right? So I can't murder my neighbor, not that I probably shouldn't say this with a recording. So not that I ever would, want to murder a neighbor. But it's theoretically I don't have that right, no matter how mad he may make me, because I've entered this social contract that says I'm going to give up that right, and in doing so, the state is going to protect me from my neighbor on the other side who maybe hates me. So that's social contract theory and sort of state of nature and how it relates there. When we talked about the Constitution, we talked about 2 different types of powers, reserved and implied powers. The important thing there, reserved powers are reserved to the states. So that's a part of the 10th Amendment. It says that anything that's not explicitly, any power that's not explicitly given to the federal government, those belong to the states. That's a point of substantial contention right now, particularly with abortion. So if you've been following the discussion around abortion prescriptive, medications, for instance, states want to be able to regulate those. Generally, the federal government is of the belief this is interstate commerce because they're being shipped across state lines, so states have no power. But the states are arguing that it's a reserved power because it's not explicitly detailed in the Constitution. Implied powers are powers that aren't explicitly mentioned in the Constitution at all, but they're implied through the writings in the Federalist Papers and other places, and maybe certain things said in the Constitution. The one that's always used is privacy, freedom of privacy. Nowhere in the Constitution does it discuss privacy specifically, but it's generally believed to be an implied power that we're implied to have this.
That's like implied from like the Second Amendment, or no, the Third Amendment.
Yes.
The
yeah.
quartering soldiers.
Yep. Good memory there. So yeah, that's the case. That's not that this comes up that often, but the few times the Third Amendment has ever come up in any sort of case law is related to that. Yep.
I feel like.
Sorry.
Can I just ask off of that?
Yeah.
Just what is the? Because like there's obviously a leap in judgment there. What is like? Where are the connecting factors with that when they make that legal, counsel?
Yeah, it was basically that the state doesn't have domain over your home, and so they couldn't order you to host soldiers in your home. And then obviously that gets into protection from search and seizure later on in the Constitution there too. So sometimes you'll see the Fifth Amendment cited as well there. Same reason, like if the Constitution says you can't put soldiers in my home, then you can't send police into my home either without a warrant or just cause.
Yeah. Yep. Fair enough.
So we talked about freedom of speech. So we spent a lot of time talking about the First Amendment there. So just know the standards for determining if speech is protected by the Constitution. And more specifically, we're looking for cases where it's definitely not protected. And there's two standards that are created there. One is clear and present danger. So if what I'm saying is creating a clear and present danger, an example would be, I'm trying to think, I'm leading a mob or something, and we show up to some city councilman's house, and I'm not attacking the city councilman, but I tell the mob to. That's probably not protected speech. The common example always used is yelling fire in a crowded auditorium or something like that, right? Because it creates a clear and present danger. The other one, and then later case law added to it to say if it incites imminent lawless action. So if you can imagine a situation where, again, you're getting people, you're standing on a podium, you're getting people very riled up. We're going to go to that city councilman's house and we're going to burn it to the ground. Well, you're expressing speech. You didn't actually burn the house down, but it could be argued you incited imminent lawless action there. Does that make sense? Oh. I talked about, does anybody remember, I talked about what is the first and foremost goal of a member of Congress? I think very simple.
Just write laws.
Close. Survival. Just getting reelected. Yeah.
That's right.
So very primitive here. Don't give them too much credit because they don't deserve it. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah.
And so I got to study under one of the guys who's sort of the world's leading experts on congressional behavior when I was in grad school. And I talk about this like it was last year. This was 20 years ago, so who knows what's changed. But, that was one of his big things, and others in that field was even though, to your point, Zach, legislators want to pass laws and they want to create legislation, they understand that they can't do it if they're not reelected and they're not actually in the House or the Senate. So they'll do what they have to do to survive. Yep. Moving to the president, we talked about executive privilege. So just know that is the privilege that the president claims to be able to essentially keep their correspondence, whether it's emails or letters or transcripts, secret and not available to the public. This is not detailed anywhere in the Constitution. It's something that just presidents decided was their thing, and the courts have generally given them that privilege. Not even at at the executive level, at the federal level, but at the state level as well. So you have governors too that claim executive privilege. There's been cases where the courts have denied it. So in cases where those materials were relevant to a criminal investigation, Watergate is the best example of Nixon there. He lost that attempt. Trump more recently has lost because it was tied to a criminal investigation tied to the January 6th events there. Anybody remember what determines the number of electoral college votes a state gets?
Their population size?
Yes. Yeah. So it's actually directly related to that. So it's basically the number of House seats that you have in that state plus 2. So 1 for each Senate seat. So if you're, North Dakota and you have one member of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, then you have 3 electoral college votes. Is how it works. Yep. But it is related to population there. So I mentioned early on when I was talking about political philosophy, Socrates is the different forms of government that he mentioned there, and they were in a hierarchy. He said, here's the best form of government, and then they just sort of devolve into these worse and worse systems. And you'll remember that democracy was actually pretty far down the list there. And then you basically right before you got into
Tyranny.
Tyranny. Thank you. Yes. But just know what I want you to pull from that is that the most ideal system of government, according to Socrates, was the aristocracy. And so that was when you had these learned experts running the government. It's cool because that's the origin of the PhD, the doctorate of philosophy, the idea that if we train somebody through the entire education system, that we've created these just and reasoned leaders. I know plenty of people with PhDs that are morons, so I don't know that necessarily equates, but that's the idea behind it. So just know that aristocracy was in his model the top sort of system of government there. Moving right along. So when we look at supremacy, so just know the order here of what has power over what. So the U.S. Constitution is, and we look to the supremacy clause in it, the U.S. Constitution is the superior law of the land. Nothing can trump the U.S. Constitution. If it's in the U.S. Constitution, there's no law at any level of government that can overrule it or anything like that. When you go beneath that, you get into federal laws, right? So federal laws can't violate the Constitution, but they're otherwise the second highest form of law in the land. Then you get the state constitutions and then state laws. And if you keep going further down, you can get to like county laws and measures and all the way down, as I've discovered being on my HOA board, even HOA regulations fall at the very bottom of this thing because we found that we had some things in place that, no, true story, we had some things in place that violated town to carry rules, and we had an attorney look at it. So we are the very bottom of the ladder there. But just know that, even though something's in a state constitution, if the federal government passes a law, that can trump anything in a state constitution. So that's the order in which it happens. Good. Let's see. Where was I at? So we talked about, treason and sedition and other things. And obviously this is relevant because it's come up a lot recently with the January 6th events. Just know that treason has to occur during a time of war. So during the January 6th events, you heard some people saying this is, treasonous, let's, charge them with treason. Doesn't apply because treason has to occur during a time of war. So you had people during World War II that were found to be aiding and abetting the Japanese, for instance, who were tried and sentenced for treason, which you could do. But if you're not in a period of war. There was a guy actually, it's been a while now, John Walker Lind, who he's known as American Taliban because he was actually fighting with the Mujahideen Taliban fighters, and he was captured by American forces, and they discovered he was actually this kid from California. And so he was actually charged and sentenced with treason, as an example of that. God, that was forever ago. I can't believe I remembered that.
Did they change that at some point from treason being something necessary for a time of war, or was that always been the?
Yeah, it's always been that way. I mean, obviously there's, it's iffy, what is a war? Does it have to be a declared war? If you're fighting a war, so much changed in the last 20 years because we were fighting a war not against another state, but against basically a nation, a national group, which isn't something we've done before. So I think that was something that was litigated in that case to say that we weren't at war with the Taliban because we couldn't be because they weren't a sovereign entity. They were just an organization. But I don't think that argument ended up working for them.
Yeah, just going all the way back, you have John Brown, I thought was the first one tried for treason, but we weren't at war. But I guess he fought against the states, right? Is that what they used then?
Yes. So, yeah, now you've given me something to go down a rabbit hole on tonight.
Sorry.
No, I like these things.
I find it interesting because I never knew that really could only, like, legally that could only be tried, like you could only be tried for that during wartime. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the standard that is created. But like I said, now you got me thinking, which is good. That's the reason I do this.
Yeah.
Because I like to be challenged. So I'm gonna go back and explore that. Good question.
That case probably had a lot of prosecutors and lawyers and everybody thinking, what
Yeah.
do you do? Because that is different.
Oh yeah. Yep. For sure. And it's a rare area of the law, things that don't come up a whole lot. For sure. Um, I don't. So I gave you a lot of amendments. I don't get. I really don't ask you for the most part to name any. What number amendment is this, with the exception of do know the 19th Amendment, because the 19th Amendment was the one that gave women the right to vote. So it was submitted in 1919. If that helps. Yeah. I think I covered in this class, but the funny story was that women actually had more voting rights, sort of prior to the U.S. Gaining its independence from Great Britain due to property laws. And so it's a funny side note in history in that they actually kind of had it and then lost it and then got it back. So I somewhere along the line I mentioned divided government there. So just know when I talk about divided government, I'm talking about a situation where not one party has control of the presidency in both chambers of Congress. So right now we have Democrats have control of the Senate, Republicans have control of the House of Representatives, and Democrats have control of the White House. That's divided government. Americans generally prefer divided government. If you ask them in polls and all the data we have is that they don't want one party in complete control. When I went through the judicial section, I mentioned amicus curiae briefs, and those are friend of the court briefs. And so the idea there is that particularly if there's a really critical Supreme Court case or any federal court case, really, the court will accept legal briefs from any organization. So, I mean, you could submit one on your own. The funny one that happened this past year was that there was a case related to whether satire was protected from defamation laws. And so it was National Lampoon, the publication, actually submitted an amicus curiae brief. And it was hilarious if you read it because it was very sarcastic, but it was supposed to prove a point that, parody and satire was should be protected. So anyways, that's an
Yes.
example.
It should.
We talked early on about demagoguery. So that's this idea of playing to people's sort of emotional desires to gain support from them. The opposite of that would be, appealing to rational arguments. And so I think the video you guys watched was the doctor telling you what to eat versus the sweet shop owner saying, screw it, eat whatever you want, sort of thing. So that would be an example of demagoguery. You can certainly understand in American politics of politicians who've claimed to be able to do things or appeal to people, and it may not be realistic. For instance, two types of federalism that we mentioned. You should know the distinction of dual federalism. That's if you use the cake analogy, that's layer cake federalism. That's where you have a clear separation between the federal government and the state government. They don't sort of intermix. The federal government does its thing, the state does its thing, and there's not a whole lot of interaction. In more contemporary times, we have what's known as cooperative federalism. And in the cake analogy, that was marble cake federalism, right? Where the different layers are kind of mixed together. That's where the state and federal government are largely cooperating. And you can see that in contemporary times. So, the Ohio train explosion, damn it, I'm going to be there in 2 weeks. I don't know how this happened to me. But anyways,
I'd be nervous.
I have a client. Yeah, I represent the Youngstown Airport, which is the nearest city to there. Anyways, that's a good example because initially it was the state of Ohio and the state of Pennsylvania were partnering to deal with this, and then it became very clear that this was too big for them, and then the federal government, National Transportation Safety Board, and EPA got involved there. Good. Okay. Know the Establishment Clause. So that basically, when we talk about, the First Amendment and freedom of religion, it's basically saying that the government is just limited and that it can't do things to essentially try and establish a religion or establish a preference for one religion over another. There's a few different caveats to that, but I would just say if you just know the Established Clause and be able to associate it with the First Amendment and freedom of religion, you'll be good there. So know the different terms of office. So I'll quiz you guys on it here. How long is a term for the House of Representatives?
2 years.
2 years? Yep. What about a U.S. Senator?
6.
6? Yep. So U.S. Senate is a 6-year term. Here's a tricky one. What about a federal judge?
For life?
For life, yep. Yep, lifetime appointment there. So as long as they're not impeached. One of the interesting things, if you look at recently under the Trump administration, they did a lot to bring in conservative judges into the federal system. But if you look at them, they specifically targeted a lot of young judges because then they'd be able to serve longer periods of time.
Longer periods.
Yeah, and have more influence there. That really is one of the longest lasting impacts of a presidency is the Supreme Court justices that they end up appointing. Not to mention all the federal court. I mean, we don't talk as much about the federal, judges beneath that, but that's important too. I think I mentioned, and I wrote a note here because I can't remember if I covered it or not. Did we talk about political polarization?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll go back in the course just to make sure I did because there may have been some readings and stuff that I cut out or some things I added from last semester. But if I didn't, I won't include it. But just know political polarization is this idea that the two sides of American politics, conservative, liberal, Democrats, Republicans, are growing further apart over time.
Yeah.
So we see this manifested in, for instance, voting preferences of candidates. You'll see a lot of issues that are all Democrats vote one way, all Republicans vote another. That's generally seen as indicative of polarization. You can measure the ideology of individual members of Congress, and then you can put a number to it and average it out. And over time, political scientists have found that those numbers have gotten further from each other from the two sides. So that's what we're talking about. Polarization means we're just imagine there are two poles on the end of the spectrum, and they're getting closer to those poles. I talked about when we talked about the president, I talked about the power of the presidency, and really the consensus among political scientists here is that it's the power to persuade. So what can a president do? Because technically a president can't pass legislation, although they can issue executive orders. But the real power of a president is to be able to persuade, whether it's members of Congress, public, the media, to be able to get their agenda across the goal line. Be able to explain the process by which a bill becomes a law. So again, you just have to kind of list the steps here, but say, it's, introduced, it has to be introduced by a member of Congress. A lot of times it comes from a lobbyist or something, but it needs to be introduced by them. It goes to a committee from there. The committee tries, if they pass it, they try to get it on the House floor or the Senate floor where it's then debated and voted on. Eventually, that legislation will have to go to a conference committee, which is a committee comprised of members of the Senate and the House. So do know what a conference committee is as well. And then if they agree and they create one piece of legislation, it goes to the president. And the president can sign the law. They can veto it. Or they could do something called a pocket veto. We didn't really talk a lot about that, but that occurs at the end of the term. The Congress has the ability to override a veto. Not that it happens very often. So just know that it takes a 2/3 vote in both chambers, both the House and the Senate, to override a veto. But definitely be able to just explain those steps that how a bill becomes a law.
I'm about to have the Schoolhouse Rock song stuck in my head.
Yeah.
Ever since you put that meme up there.
So it's funny because I make those references.
I remember that.
I make those references and I have no idea who's going to get them because you got to remember, I started teaching this when I was 21 and I was like, yeah, it's like, I'm almost your age. Like we all, have the same references. And it was before memes and stuff, but now 2 decades later, I'm like, I don't know what people remember.
Well, that's I do. I'm an older student, so I'm in my 30s, so I'm not far behind you.
No, I appreciate that.
I made a Frasier reference the other day, and no one got it in this discussion board in my other class.
Oh, nice, nice.
Win some of
That's funny. Just a few more things.
References.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too. I was like, you could go a little further back there.
I've talked about Cliff Clavin before with people, and it's just no one. So I just get nobody. I'm like, all right, yeah, that's fine.
You know what blows my mind is my two 10-year-olds are rabid watchers of The Simpsons, and they're watching the same episodes I watched at the exact same age, and it blows my mind that it's still like
Yep.
engaging to them. Yeah.
Good show.
So just a couple more things to cover here before we wrap up. Direct democracy versus representative. So a direct democracy system is where the citizens vote directly on measures. And so think about that like a ballot initiative, for instance. Not that I don't know if actually I don't even know if North Carolina does ballot initiatives. I haven't seen any. Different states have different rules. California has a lot of them. That's an example of direct democracy. Most of the legislation that's passed is based on representative democracy, right? So we elect a member of the House of Representatives who casts a ballot on our behalf, that sort of thing. Know what eminent domain is? That's a provision in the Constitution that allows any level of government to basically take your private property with just cause and compensation. So that could be that we need to build this interstate, and you've got this farm that goes through, and we need to take this strip of land to build this interstate. It's a fascinating area of law because it's been used for things such as we want to put a Walmart here, and your house is in the way. So it's really sketchy when it gets to like private enterprise.
Yes.
Well, I will say I don't directly do this, but in the airport world and in my space, we engage in a lot of it because we want to expand a runway. And your house is in the way, then we can make the argument to say, well, if we don't expand this runway, then this is the economic impact, the money that's lost as a result of the tax base and that sort of thing. So fortunately, I'm not involved in much of that. That's not my part of the business.
You remember you talked about in the slides for that. I remember the Japanese airport out of Akita, right? Has that really? They have a farm in the airport.
And
yeah.
In Narita, yeah. And I've taxied the first time I taxied past it. And
that was kind of cool.
I was like, the hell is this? And so immediately the next time I had Wi-Fi access, I was on my way to China. So when I travel to China, we have burner devices. So they have very limited access, and then we have to throw them away when we get back. But it may have been when I got back in the States, I was like, all right, what is going on here? And I don't know what the eminent domain laws are there. I just know the airport lost, and these farmers got to keep their land. Yeah, that's funny. I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah.
So just know that the judicial selection process, so the president nominates federal judicial nominees. They have to be confirmed by the Senate by a simple majority vote. So we see that with the Supreme Court, and that's obviously highly publicized. We don't see it as much, but it occurs at the district court level as well. Speaking of courts, there's two terms: judicial activism and judicial restraint. Judicial activism, it's sort of a kind of a charge levied on courts where people say, you guys are trying to create legislation, you're trying to use the bench to create law, you're being activist judges. Restraint is the idea that the judges simply interpret the law based on precedent and constitutional principles, and they're not involved in legislating. In practice, that's an accusation that is made based on, how favorable you are towards the ruling. Okay, just a couple more things here. Definitely be able to, and I'll tell you, I'll repeat it for Zach when he comes back. This is a question on the exam. Be able to explain gerrymandering. So go back to that section where I talked about gerrymandering, how districts are, basically the idea here is that after the decennial census and populations are apportioned, and it's decided how many congressional districts your state gets based on population, then the party in charge of the state legislature gets to decide how those districts are created. You looking for a pen, Zach?
Yeah, I just dropped it. I found it. We're good. and I heard you the whole. My headset is wireless. So.
Oh, cool. So know that process. Know how it comes about. Know that the political party in power uses gerrymandering to create congressional districts that are advantageous to their party, so that basically give them the most representation as possible. More specifically, I want you to be able to explain to me, what happened in North Carolina, specifically with regard to race. So go back to those slides there where I talk about how they created that super funky political district that stretched from Charlotte through Winston and Greensboro and into Durham, I think it was, and how, the court basically said, look, you can draw districts for political reasons, but you can't use race as the basis for it. The idea there is they tried to take all African American voters, or a majority of them, and stick them in one district, so they had less representation across the whole.
Across the board, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely know the difference between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, so kind of who they were. So go back to our section on federalism there, and kind of what their preferences were. So obviously the Federalists wanted a strong, centralized government. The Anti-Federalists wanted, a weaker government, stronger, state government. I think I detailed that pretty good for you guys, but just be able to explain that in a couple sentences. What do I have here? So I think I talked about, tell me how a bill becomes a law and what is the legislative process there. Be able to explain the judicial appointment process. So we talked about there, but also know sort of what are the factors that a president would look for in a potential judicial candidate. And how does that differ based on who's in the Senate? So if my party is in control of the Senate, I'm probably going to pick somebody who ideologically is very close to me. If my party doesn't control the Senate, then I probably have to make some concessions there and, come up with something a little more moderate. And then finally, be able to explain the process by which an impeachment a president can be impeached. So basically, articles of impeachment are brought up in the House of Representatives. It takes a majority vote to impeach the president, but that's not sentencing. That's almost sort of akin to a criminal indictment, if you will. And then it goes to the Senate, where basically a trial is held. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court oversees that trial. A 2/3 majority of the Senate is required to actually sentence a president. Is that not just a president? It could be any federal officer, a federal judge, for instance. But that's the process and how it's carried out. Yeah, that's my list of things there. I know we went a little bit longer there, but any questions from you guys?
Well, actually, I do have one.
Sure.
With the, God knows, I just had it. Hold on. You literally just went over it, but anyway. Oh, the gerrymandering process.
Sure.
Did you ever cite a specific person who was responsible for like redrawing those maps? And did you want us to?
There, no, I think I gave you guys a video that talked about the guy in North Carolina who sort of spearheaded the effort there. But you don't necessarily need to know that. Really all you need to know is that it's the party in control of the state legislature, because they're the ones that vote on the district maps. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you do any curve on your exams?
I usually don't, because I usually don't have to, because like I said, the average grade usually ends up, it's usually pretty solidly an 87. It doesn't vary a whole lot from that. So people generally do pretty well on this. And, for the most part, like I said, the folks that don't historically, I can usually see through the system who's accessed the review and who hasn't, and there's a strong relationship there. So I would, if I ever got in that situation. This exam or some iteration of it, I've used a couple times, so I'm pretty sure the results are going to be pretty good. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yep. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys making the time tonight. I've got all your names, so I'll give you guys credit. I'm really behind on grading you guys' class. I'm a little better with my other one, but I'm catching up this week, so I apologize. You know what happened is my wife is teaching, my wife's an immigration attorney, and she's teaching a course in immigration law at the University of Memphis, and it's been a crap show. They gave her access to the course 3 days before it started. The class is halfway.
My God.
Yeah, here's the best part. The class is halfway over. They still haven't given her the textbook. She's been assigning textbook readings, and she hasn't even seen it. So yeah. So
that's fine.
I've been helping her because she's completely lost. She's never taught before, so I'm teaching immigration law somewhat this semester too.
Well, you do a lot. Aside from that, you do a lot.
Yeah,
you introduced yourself to us and told us all that you do behind the scenes. I was like, wow.
I will tell you, no, I appreciate that. It's starting to catch up with me, and I've got a therapist who was like, "When are you going to start saying no to things?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, probably should. So yeah, actually, so strangely enough, this will actually my last semester teaching at Wake Tech. I love working with students and stuff. I just, from an adjunct perspective, and we don't get paid anything, which is fine because I just do it because I enjoy it. But they want us to do a lot more administrative stuff like enrollment, record keeping, and all that. And I'm like, yeah, it was like then it becomes a job. It was like I just do this because it's fun.
Well, they pay
it's
you
weird
so
that they have
little.
you
When
do
you
it.
told us how much they pay you, I was shocked.
Yeah, it's it's just a fun thing. I'm glad that I could do it. My employer is cool with it. The other challenge is I was in a different job when I started doing this where I wasn't doing anything. I mean, I was looking for things to work on, and I since am with a new company and I'm busier. So anyway, so I'll probably take a break after this semester, and yeah. But yeah. No, I enjoy having you guys. It's funny, I'm on a Reddit thread that's all adjuncts, bitching about students. I'm like, I love the students. I was like, it's the schools that I usually have an issue with. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, and appreciate your time and good luck on the exam.
Thank you. Appreciate your
Thank
time coming
you.
and doing
Good
this
luck,
for us.
everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure thing.
Have a good one.